trying to get that place over there cool, but hopefully soon we'll be able to move back over there for other things. So that's Tuesday, 6:30, and that's week what of what? 11 to 13. But you're going to go straight through and do the next two as well. Is that right? No, you're taking a break. So you're not going to do the surviving the holidays things right after. So it's going to go do 2 Saturdays. Okay, so it's actually 15 weeks. Not to depress you, or do it Saturday. Fine with me. It's open both times. Whatever you want to do. And then on Thursday, 7 p.m., we have the Bible study. We've been going through The Chosen. We're on episode 3. You don't have to take them in order. In fact, they almost don't go in order, so you don't have to if you miss it. You can zoom in if you want to. We've overcome the technology problems of that now, so we're streaming without glitch and with full volume. We had to figure some things out there, but we got that working. So we got that going on Thursdays. It's a lot of fun. I'm actually looking forward to it. I don't know if you guys have seen The Chosen, but it's kind of neat. And then we talk about it later. You know, it's about usually The Chosen lasts about 34, 35 minutes, something like that, and then we, have a little discussion over some of the things they talked about in the episode. Really kind of digging what they're doing. It's trying to show Jesus through the eyes of the people who were changed by him instead of focusing just on Jesus. Although this time Jesus got to play with the kids. It was kind of fun. Kind of a fun episode. So that's Thursdays. The next prayer circle is the 25th of September. And I don't have anything else, right? The women's group's on September 14th, which is a Monday. Anything else? No? Okay. So we had a little contest going. Not really. But I offered anybody. I bribed you. So the name of the new series we're just starting today is called Crying Out Loud. And I asked people who are interested, no one has to play the game, if you wanted to guess what the series was about, to text me or message me or email me and correct me if I'm wrong, but no one in this room did. Yeah, no one did. Okay. Okay, you did, right. Okay. I'm still trying to decide whether I have to disqualify you, but okay. So the thing was, if you guess it right, I was going to give you M&Ms. And I bought a bag of M&Ms. Rick, I don't know if you knew that, but...
Well, you didn't text me about the shed.
Well, yeah, that's not true. I did. I shared the text. I maybe have the wrong number. I don't know. Anyway, that's a different story. But yeah, so I have M&Ms, but no one actually Victoria won a pack of M&Ms that she doesn't like anyway. But I have plain an M&M. I came prepared just in case, but nobody here guessed. So we will now get into the series for Crying Out Loud, week number 1. And I don't know if you can see this graphic. It's too dark. I got to lighten it. For Crying Out Loud is going to be a study of the Psalms. So I had a lot of facts about the Psalms that I was going to share with you all, but I won't be able to get to them because, man, this sermon's going to go long if I don't. But basically 150 Psalms, largest book in the Bible, most quoted book in the Bible. Jesus quotes more from the Psalms than any other book in the Bible. When I grew up, I always thought the entire book of Psalms was written by David. That's not true. David wrote about 74, 75 of them. He's actually, in the book of Psalms, he's actually got his name on them, the copyright CCLI number there for the Psalm. But 2 of them, I think, we get from the New Testament, quotes him and says it's David. So that's how we know it's David. I'm only going to focus on the David Psalms for this series. We're not doing all 75 of them, but we're going to do a bunch. And I want to start with Psalm number 1. And this is actually a personal thing for me. And let me tell you a quick little story why this is important to me or why it's interesting to me. In 2012, the year before we opened Spirit Chapel, I was preaching in the church that we were going to at the time, Mount Vernon Presbyterian Church over the hill. Pastor was on sabbatical, and they're asking some people to pinch hit, and so I volunteered. And what was kind of neat about this was about 40 years ago, my father was at that church. He was a pastor there for about 6 years. And so my father at the time was in a semi-assisted living center in Tulsa, where my brother was watching after him. And but I was still calling him and talking to him regularly. And I thought it was kind of neat that I was going to be preaching at the church. And that's actually the first church I remember. I was, I think, Well, I was actually born when we were at that church, and because I was born in McKeesport Hospital, so that's the first church I know of. He was another pastor other places first, but that was the first one I remember. Anyway, so I thought I'd call my dad and tell him about it. I thought that'd be kind of neat, and so I did. And we were talking about him, when he got there, and I said, "You don't remember the first sermon you preached there by any chance, do you?" And just like talking, And at the time, by the way, I had no intention of being a pastor. Spirit Chapel wasn't a gleam in my wife's eye yet. I mean, we had no idea any of this was going to happen. I was just preaching, 1 week, one and done kind of a thing. He says, "No, I don't remember specifically, but I'm sure it was Psalm 1." I said, "Well, how can you be sure?" Because that was always my audition sermon. I didn't know pastors had to audition. And so I always went to Psalm 1. I thought, well, that was interesting. I kind of tucked that away. And then after we opened the church, I had to go watch him. Actually, this is like earlier than that. I had to watch him for a week. And I went out there and I was with him because my brother went on vacation. And I asked him one day, "Do you remember your 3 points to the sermon you preached at Psalm 1?" And my dad had a memory that kind of came and went in those days. And he looked at me and says, "I didn't know I preached Psalm 1." I said, "You told me it was always your audition sermon." Because I'm sure I did, and I'm sure that's true, but I don't remember. I'm sorry. I thought, oh man, I'm gonna have to try that again because I really kind of wanted to know because I was desperate for material. We were opening the church, and I was going to preach. I could use some ideas. And then my father passed away shortly after he opened the church, and I never got a chance to hear what he preached on for Psalm 1. But I thought, man, that's his go-to scripture. It must have been something. And so then I thought, well, I'll preach on it. And this is like the first year of Spirit Chapel. I said, well, I'll just do a sermon. I'll do Psalm 1. It's before I started doing series. And I opened up Psalm 1 and I read it. I thought, well, how do you get a sermon out of this? I mean, it's 6 verses. I mean, you preached a whole in those days, 20-minute sermon. Yeah, I know, you guys. It's like 20 minutes. He's just warming up 20 minutes. We haven't even started the sermon. It's going to be 20 minutes. But 20-minute sermon in those days, 3 points in the sermon. He's a classically trained pastor. And I thought, how in the world do you get... So I walked away from it. So now we've been going at it for a little while. I feel a little more comfortable up here. And I thought the only way I'm going to know what to say about Psalm 1 is if I tell God I'm preaching it and jump out on faith, because that seems to be the way my sermons work. So I'm going to do something a little bit differently today. I'm going to read you all 6 verses, then I'm going to break it down. I don't know if this is the sermon my dad preached. I've listened to a few sermons on Psalm 1. A lot of preachers preach on Psalm 1, but they've all been a little bit different, so I don't know. Anyway, let me give you my version of it. So, blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor stands in the path of sinners, nor sits in the seat of the scornful. But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and in his law he meditates day and night. He shall be like a tree planted by the rivers of water that bring forth its fruit in its season, whose leaf also shall not wither, and whatever he does shall prosper. Now the ungodly, they're not so. They're like chaff which the wind drives away. Therefore the ungodly shall not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the congregation of the righteous. For the Lord knows the way of the righteous, but the way of the ungodly shall perish. So if I were to do a 3-point sermon, I would say this is what this sermon's about. And I don't do 3-point sermons. This isn't what I'm doing. But this is what it's about. First part of it's what to avoid. Second part of it, what is to do. And the third part of what's the result. What's God do? That's kind of be the 3 points I'd bring out. Like I said, I don't do 3-point sermons. My guess is that's where my dad went. But I want to start with the verse here. Walk not in the counsel of the godly. Now, this was an interesting psalm because I went through the different translations. There's so many you can get. You go to BibleGateway.com, and there's like 45 different translations you can go through. And I usually bounce through several. I usually start with New King James Version because it attempts to be a word-for-word translation, best it can. You can't really go Hebrew to English word for word, but it tries. And then I usually jump back to NASB, and that's similar to New King James. It adds a little bit extra. And then I'll usually go to some kind of paraphrase like the NIV, which just tries to give you the concept of it, necessarily not the word for word. And now I'm jumping over into Victoria's Bible every now and the Holman Bible. And I kind of bounce around like that. And I read them, and it was interesting to me to see the differences in the way they translated this, especially this first one. And so that drove me back to my favorite place to go when I'm studying is Blue Letter Bible, because it shows you the etymology of the word. And New King James Version has it pretty close. Walk not in the counsel of the ungodly. Now, some people say wicked, some people will say sinners, but walk not in the counsel of the ungodly. And that's interesting because one of the translations says, don't seek the advice of the ungodly. Well, that's very different here, isn't it? Walk not in the counsel of the ungodly. But the interesting thing about that is they all kind of bring the same idea. And that is the ungodly wants to influence you. That's really what this verse is about. It's warning you that there are influencers. And the influencers are the people who are not following the same God you're following. Their direction is different. And so it's basically saying don't live according to the advice that would be given to you by those who don't serve God. And there's a reason for that. And some people say, well, I can't ask advice of anybody if they're not a Christian. That doesn't even sound like good business practice, because not every Christian's smart. Let's face it. Some of those ungodly people are pretty smart with like money. Can I do what the psalmist is actually talking here is not advice. It's not like he's not saying, look, if you're trying to decide between buying an iPhone or an Android, don't ask sinners. He's not saying that. What he's saying is if you have something in your life that's a life-altering decision, don't go to the ungodly for advice. Because whether they want to or not, their advice is coming from a different perspective, and they're going to give you the advice of the devil. They don't mean to. It isn't like they've thought about it, but that's who they're serving, and that's what they're being driven by, and so that's how they're going to advise you. When my dad used to tell a story when he took Ted, my younger brother, out to teach him how to ride a bicycle. He took him up to the high school up here. And they didn't have as much there as they did now. He says this big empty parking lot, and they had this one little tiny do not park sign like in the middle of this parking lot here. And Dad, picked it because there really wasn't anything for him to run into here. So he got him on a bike. He says, okay, now I'm going to hold you. I'm going to let you go. And you pedal, right? And so he's running behind him as Dad's doing. He let go. And as soon as he let go, and he had him pointing this way, he saw Ted's wheels wobble. And that little sign is over here. And he watched that bike wobble, 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 and drove in a straight line. And he said he hit that sign dead center. I mean, the sign was that big, the little thing, and the tire was that big, and he hit it dead center. He goes falling off it. And Dad says, as soon as he let go of it, he saw Ted look over and see the sign. And as soon as he did, that bike just started getting pulled over because you drive to what you're looking at, right? And that's how they teach you. I don't know if everybody's ever played baseball or something, but if you ever learn how to pitch, you got a catcher sitting behind a home plate. He's holding up a target for you, and they tell you got to keep your eye on the target. Even when you're doing your windup and you're doing your pitch, you're supposed to be keeping your eye on the target because when you take your eye off the target, the ball doesn't go there anymore. And that's kind of how it is in life, What you're looking at, you will drive towards. And if you are going to an ungodly person, they're not looking to God. They're looking somewhere else, and that's going to drive them to there. And he says, if you're going to them to get your advice and get your counsel, guess where you're going to be pulled to? So you have to be careful about that because you have to understand you always are living under spiritual guidance. You always are. You say, well, I need some spiritual guidance. I'm going to go to the church. You're getting spiritual guidance whether you go to the church or not. The only question is whether it's going to be the Holy Spirit or not. But there's always spiritual forces trying to guide you in your decisions. It just depends on which decision you're trying to guide into. So that's what that's about. So if a sinner, though, if it's like sometimes I talk to some people say, well, if I'm going to go for money advice, I kind of don't want to go to a Christian because they seem poor all the time. I want to go to the person who's smart and has the money and everything. Well, you have to worry about what you're after here. I'm not saying make bad financial decisions. I'm just simply saying if you're being motivated by money, if you're basically saying, well, I'm going to go here because a sinner seems to have a better handle on this, you have to ask yourself what you're really being motivated by. Because a sinner should not have better handle on, the spiritual matters. So we see this happen up in the book of Proverbs, which we're not going to get to this series. But the book of Proverbs has an interesting verse in it. It says this. It says, there's a way that seems right to a man, but the end of it leads to death. So a lot of times, we're kind of trying to figure things out on our own, and we're going and getting the counsel of people in the world, and we're following advice of the people of the world. We go buy their books, we go listen to them on YouTube or whatever, and we're starting to do that. And the Bible's saying it seems right to you. It seems like this is a good way, but you have to understand that its way leads to death. When Victoria and I were moving from Texas to Virginia, we weren't. I won't talk to Victoria. You can ask her where she was. But I wasn't very close to God at the time. I still believed. I wasn't an unbeliever. I didn't think, but I was motivated by a lot of things besides what God wanted. And I had met this pastor at a church, and we'd gotten to be a little bit friends. And when I told him that we were moving, he asked me where, and I said, well, we don't know exactly yet. We're going to move to the Washington, D.C. area. He said, oh, he says, I know 3 great churches in that area. Let me get you their addresses. I thought, why? He said, well, so you can know where to live, so you can pick a place near a good church. That was the dumbest thing I'd ever heard of in my life. I mean, I smiled and I thanked him. I took the 3 addresses. I never looked at them. Who in the world picks where they're going to live based on having a good church to go to? I mean, even though I was a preacher's kid, and believe me, we always lived based on church, because my dad, we lived in the parsonage. Growing up, that was the way I lived, but that was because my dad was a preacher. I had to. My dad's a professional Christian. We had to do that then. But why would we do such a stupid thing? You pick it for the school district, yeah, sure. That you pick it for the good value for your thing, low taxes. There's a lot of things, low crime. Go look on the websites. They always tell you how to pick a house. Good church isn't on the list. If you find a church, you'll drive to a church. It doesn't matter. You'll find a church. But he was actually saying, no, you should pick your church first and then decide where you're going to live. That was so weird to me. But here's what he was saying to me, and I didn't understand then. Is God important in your life or not? Right? If God's really important in your life, then, and God's the most important thing in your life, isn't that the most important thing you're going to choose first? Don't you get that locked in first? And then you do that? So Jesus says, seek first the kingdom of heaven and all these things will be added unto it. I mean, this is what the Bible tells us, but I didn't live that way. I don't know if you guys do. I certainly was never living that way. But there's so many decisions we make in our life that really impact our life. And those decisions need to have God in the middle of them. And there's like, who I'm going to marry, and where am I going to live? And, if I change jobs and we have to move here, what's that going to do to my life? And I was always looking at it simply from the monetary standpoint. This is a good career advancement, and then we'll do it. It never occurred to me, what's going to happen to my relationship with the Lord? That never, ever entered into it. But the world's advice will only make sense if all you want to do is succeed in the world. It's really simple. If you say, well, this makes sense to me, you better ask yourself where you're trying to succeed. Jesus says this. He said, look, no servant can serve 2 masters. Either he hates the one and loves the other, or he'll be loyal to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon. Now, we sometimes see the translation God and wealth. Mammon gets translated wealth. But Jesus said mammon, and it's believed that there actually was a god in a temple, Mammon, that you could serve. And this came down, and basically Mammon would be the god of avarice. And so we have to understand that these decisions that we make on earth determine our life in heaven. So when we're making decisions like that, and Jesus is saying, well, you can't serve God and mammon, choose God of the world, God of heaven, which one to do. When you start making choices for the God and the world, it's going to affect your relationship with God. It actually affects your life in heaven. So mammon is kind of a creepy God, because he's just basically a God of avarice and greed, which actually is a perfect God for the United States. And of course, whenever I hear this, I always think of the great Gordon Gekko's speech.
The point is, ladies and gentlemen, that greed, for lack of a better word, is good. Greed is right. Greed works. Greed clarifies, cuts through, and captures the essence of the evolutionary spirit.
Yeah, greed is good. So that's a chilling speech, actually, because you almost can feel the chills when he speaks in his theater. But Jesus is saying greed's not good. And you can't serve that desire in your life and God. Those two are incompatible. So what the psalmist is saying is, when you're going to ask for advice, who are you going to ask it from? You have to be very, very careful who you're seeking advice from. And so he says, don't walk with their advice. Don't walk in the way of their advice. And then the next verse kind of doesn't even make sense, because it shifts. He uses a different verb here. It's interesting. He says, don't stand in the path of sinners. I think those verbs are backwards. I'd say don't stand and ask for advice, and don't walk with sinners, but that's not what the psalmist says. He says don't walk in their advice, and don't stand in the path of sinners. Well, what's he talking about here? See, there's an awful lot of times that we don't want to sin, but we want to see sin. I'm just going to get close enough that I could see it. I'm kind of interested in it. I'm kind of attracted to it, but I'm not going to, of course I wouldn't do that. I just want to kind of see it. If you remember the story of Lot, when Abraham and Lot are there in the promised land for the first time, and they're getting so big and prosperous, how's that for a problem, that they start running into each other too much. And so Abraham says, Lot, why don't you just take your guys and go anywhere you want. As they stood there, they're surrounded by miles and miles of the promised land. He said, pick anywhere you want to go. You go that way, and I'll go the opposite direction. What do you want? I'll give you first choice, which is really gracious of Abraham. And Lot looks around and he sees in the distance the city of Sodom and Gomorrah. And he looks at that lights and he knows they had a reputation, by the way. They had a reputation even then. It's like Vegas at their worst day can't reach Sodom and Gomorrah heights. And so he looks at that and goes, oh, I want that. I want that in my land. I want that in my backyard. I want to have the nice vista of Sodom and Gomorrah in the distance. And Abraham said, okay. And he went back to where he had a temple built already for God. And so they split up. But the Bible tells us at the end of that chapter, and Lot went and he pitched his tent facing Sodom and Gomorrah. He was standing in the path of sinners. I'm not sinning myself, but I'm interested. What are those guys, crazy people over there in Sodom and Gomorrah doing? I want to watch it. I want to see it. So he pitched his tent facing Sodom and Gomorrah. He stood in the path of sinners. The next chapter, by the way, we see he's in Sodom and Gomorrah, because that's how it works. And eventually, they have to send angels to get him out of Sodom and Gomorrah, so he's not destroyed. Lot's life does not go well because he was in the path of sinners. And that's what he wanted to do. Now, we have good intentions, of course. Okay, I'm going to be there, but, I'm going to be a light to the sinners. That's what I'm going to be. Yeah, I know a lot of people who decide to be lights to the people in their lives or their friends. I keep these sinner friends around me because I want to give them the word. Sure you do. Sure you do. You're not at all interested in the sin. I know more guys who've married unsaved women, and women have married more unsaved guys thinking they're going to change them, and it never works that way. In fact, in Corinthians, Paul says this, don't be deceived. Bad company will corrupt good morals. It is so much easier pulling somebody down than up. So much easier. And that's what happens. So when we walk where sinners tell you to go, in the first verse, we end up standing in the midst of sin. That's what happens. And that's what he's warning you about. He says, first you ask for their advice, then you end up standing there in the midst of their path, and the next move is you're going to be with them. That's what happened with Lot. That's exactly what happened with Lot. And so the psalmist is saying, you don't want to do that. In fact, he says, blessed are you if you don't do it. God's going to bless you if you don't do this, is what he's saying. It's the whole thing about it. So moving on to the next verse, it says, and he doesn't sit in the seat of the scornful. Now, this gets translated by some of the translations as mockers or scoffers. You know them, right? There's always the wisecracking people who sit around and make fun of everybody else. That table, the cool kids table, really. They sit there and they make fun of everybody. In high school, it's because, you didn't come from the right place, you didn't have the right clothes. Now you don't have the right phone. They know this. Apple knows this. So every so often they change the style, like of those weird, I guess some of you guys probably have them, I'm trying to make fun of them, but those weird AirPods, that they look like the headphones are missing the wires. They kind of hang out of your ears, They changed the design of that slightly when they came out the next version. Not because they had to, but they wanted the kids to know by looking whether or not they had the new version or the old version. That's why they did it. And then the kids couldn't have the old version anymore. Even if it was fine, you couldn't be stuck with those, It's like when the Model T Ford was made, it was a hugely successful car. And somebody said once, the Model T Ford is a lot like a bathtub. Everybody's got one, but you don't want to be seen in it. It's like they wanted to get something different, and you always the next thing. And so they're scornful. They're mockers, right? They're sitting around, they're talking about other people. They're making fun of them. Maybe the way they dress, maybe the way they act, maybe the way the crappy car they got out of before they went to Walmart, or the accent that they have, or something. There's always something that they find to make fun of them. Scornful mockers. Here's the thing about the scornful and the mockers. The mockers are people who give up. The truth of the matter is, those people aren't going anywhere. They're mocking everybody else, so they don't have to consider that. When you see a table of people making fun of other people, they're not doing anything. It's not like they're making fun of them and they're so much better. Oh, they might have bought the latest iPad or something, or the latest iPhone, but that doesn't make them better, and they know it. They're giving up. They know they're not getting anywhere in their lives. They get joy out of trying to bring other people down. It's interesting to me that the psalmist says this is the progression. You start by seeking their advice, and they start influencing you. There's a whole occupation now, social media influencer. That blows my mind. There's actually people that can get paid by other companies by wearing their clothes or their shoes or something because they have a million followers who go out and do it. It's like, these Kardashians or something. If they say they like something, it's instantly a bestseller. It's amazing to me. There's this influence they have over these lemmings, and so that's what they're miserable though. They give up. These people who do all these things, they know that they don't have a life, and so they mock other people. So you start by seeking their advice and looking for their influence in your life, and before you know it, you get attracted by the sin, and then your life stops. Your momentum's gone, and you sit around and make fun of other people. That's all you got left. You sit around criticizing other people. It's amazing to me. It's like, what do you care? Why do you care? Like I saw somebody walking in. They had so many piercings, and everything else, and I thought, well, that's kind of gross. And I opened my mouth to say something, because I've sat at that table. Not the cool kids table, but the mockers table. I've sat at that table. My wife will tell you. And I opened my mouth to say something, and I thought, what do I care? Look, if they want to whistle when the wind blows, that's their business, right? What do I care? Is it affecting my life at all? No, it's not. Why would I say anything? Why would I care? If I care because I honestly care and I worry about their salvation, that's one thing, but just to mock people? Paul says this. He said, look, you can't be sitting with these people. You can't just be hanging out with them and thinking it doesn't affect you. Because it does. If you sit around people always running everybody else down around them, you'll start joining in. And it just brings you down. It doesn't build you up. It builds nobody up. And this verse we actually use a lot in marriage counseling, but Paul isn't talking about marriage here. He's talking about friends. He says, don't be unequally yoked together with unbelievers. Like I said, we talk about this as a husband and wife, but he's just talking friends here. He said, what fellowship does righteousness have with lawlessness? What communion does light have with darkness? What accord has Christ with Belial, which is a demon? Or what part has a believer with an unbeliever? And what agreement has a temple of God with idols? You're the temple of the living God. As God has said, I will dwell in them and walk among them. I will be their God, and they shall be my people. Paul said, what are you doing with these people? Why are you sitting at the table of the mockers? Why are you joining in with that? It's so easy to do, because if you're all sitting there making fun of other people, no one's making fun of you. Funny thing about those tables, by the way, when you're not there, they are making fun of you. Or at least that was my experience. So anyway, listening to what sinful advice, walking among the sinful, and then mocking others, doing nothing, this is what we call the path of least resistance. It's easy to do. It's so easy to do. You just become a part of the world. It's easy to become a part of the world. It's hard to go the other way. Jesus said this, excuse me, you need to enter God's kingdom, and when you get there, you're going to find it's a narrow gate. Now, the gate is large and the road is wide that leads to ruin. See, many people go that way, but the gate is small and the road is narrow that leads to life. There are very few who find that. So this is how it goes. If you're looking for the easy way, that's not the way to heaven. The wide road, the easy road, the way that looks so easy to you, that's leading you to ruin. There's a way that seems good to a man, but in the end, it leads to ruin. Same thing Jesus is saying here. He said, what you want to look for is that hard path. It's going to be a narrow road. It's going to take you to a narrow door, and there won't be many people. Nice thing is, there won't be a line there. There won't be many people there. But this is how you get to heaven, he says. You got to walk away from these other things. The journey to righteousness will begin when we learn to say no to the world. And that, I know, is something that people don't like about Christianity. Why are Christians always telling me what I can't do? I can't do this. I can't do that. I hate that. I want to be able to do things. I don't want to be held back. That's the way I felt much of my life. But then I learned that self-denial is the key to strength. And you can ask any athlete how many times they had to deny themselves. In fact, here's a good one. A better body starts here in the kitchen, saying no to all the things I love. Ice cream, sugar, caffeine, all these things I just love. But if you want to get there, you start here. You start by saying no to things. If you listen to, I don't know if you ever saw the commercial Sidney Crosby made for the NHL one year, but he talked about all the things he missed growing up. He never went to prom. He missed his high school graduation. All these sacrifices he made to become the greatest player of his generation in the NHL. He denied himself many things in order to be good at one thing. Every athlete knows that. They got to deny themselves certain foods. Sometimes they have to deny themselves sleep. They have to get up and work out in the morning. Sometimes they have to push past the point when they just want to go to sleep. All their friends are sitting back and watching Netflix and drinking beer. They're working out because they have a goal in mind, right? We know that. Self-denial is the key to strength. So if you're feeling spiritually weak on Sunday, maybe it's because you've been spending all week saying yes to the devil. You get stronger as you say no. Your spiritual growth starts by saying no to the devil. These other things, the listening to the advice of the sinners and standing in the path of sin and sitting with the mockers, it's easy to do, but you're not getting stronger that way. You want to get stronger as a Christian, you have to start saying no to some of these things. So where does all this get us? Okay, if I do all that, where does it get us? Well, then we get into the fun part of the psalm, where he shifts. He goes, okay, if you do this, if you can say no to this stuff, here's what happens. You're going to be like a tree planted by the rivers of water that brings forth its fruit in its season, whose leaf shall not wither, and whatever they do prospers. Now I want to point out a couple things. We talk about this tree, and the tree is planted. It is not potted. Potted trees have limits to how far they can grow. My wife grows a garden every year. And this year we have the cherry tomatoes in a pot. And it's this high. I can show you pictures from last year before that. We planted them in the ground. It was like Jack and the Beanstalk. I mean, these things were taller than me, right? But now they're in a pot. There's only so much they can get out of a pot. You only grow so high. What David is talking about here is a tree that's planted by water, and there's no limit to how high it can grow. These things are amazing. They'll get those roots in the water, and man, they'll suck it, and they'll just keep growing and growing and growing. But roots grow over time. And it's great that he's talking about trees here and not corn. Corn grows in a season. He's talking about trees. He says, here's what you're going to be like. It's not going to be overnight. You're going to put roots down, and you're going to commit to the spot. This tree doesn't get moved. That one that I was showing a minute ago. It's gone now. That doesn't move. It stays there unrooted. And it sits there, and it commits. And it commits to its source, which is the river, and it pulls that in, and it will continue to pull that in until it gets bigger and bigger and stronger and stronger. In fact, what we could say is rooted is very similar to a word that Jesus uses in the New Testament, and that is abide. Jesus talks about abiding in me. He says, abide in me and I'll in you. As a branch cannot bear fruit of itself unless it abides in the vine, so neither can you unless you abide in me. Abide means to stay. He's saying, stay with me and I'll stay with you. It's no different from what God says in the Old Testament. Draw near to me and I'll draw near to you. Here's the deal, God's saying. If you stay with me, I will stay with you. And that's how you bear fruit. By you staying with me and me staying with you. What we'd want to do is we want to get in and get out. In fact, let me put it this way. I think we like to play hokey pokey with God. How many of you have ever done the dance, the hokey pokey? My wife probably hasn't. You probably have no idea what I'm talking about. Hokey pokey. Okay. Does anybody know how it goes? You put your left foot in. You take your left foot out. You put your left foot in. You take your left foot out. And you shake it all about. You do the hokey pokey. That's what we do with God, right? We put our left foot in with God. We take our left foot out of God. We put our right foot in with God. We take our right foot out. And we shake it all around. And God's like, you know what? Enough of the hokey pokey. Abide in me. And I'll abide in you. And you'll grow. But this little game that we play back and forth, and then we want our faith. And then all of a sudden we need our faith. God's saying, here's how you grow faith. You abide in me. And we say, okay, that's cool and everything, but I need faith right now. And the reason I need faith right now is because there's a prayer request I have to make of the Lord. And I know that if I have faith of a mustard seed, this really great faith, I'll get answered because the prayers of a righteous man availeth much. I know that scripture. And so what I need right now is how do I get faith to make this prayer get answered? And Jesus is saying, it doesn't work that way. Here's how you get faith. You abide in me. That's how you get faith. Faith is grown over time. You don't get it in an instant. That's what we want. But Jesus says, no, faith is what remains in a lifetime. In fact, he even tells a little parable about this. He talks about a parable and he says there was a certain city, a judge, and he didn't fear God. He didn't care about man. He was basically a corrupt judge. And there was this widow in that city, and she came to him saying, get justice for me from my adversary. So someone was picking on, this is something that happened a lot to widows because they really had no protection in the way that system was set up. And so they had to go to the judge to get the protection. And she was saying, I need your help. I'm being taken advantage of by, who knows, a neighbor or somebody nearby. And he says, I don't care. It's your problem, not mine. And he wouldn't help her, not for a while. But afterwards, he said to himself, I don't fear God. I don't care about men, but this woman's really getting on my nerves. She won't shut up. She keeps coming and coming and coming. And so I'm going to help her because she's going to wear me out by continually coming to me. Now, what Jesus says is, if this is the way an unrighteous judge acts, imagine my Father. He says, if this guy don't you think God is going to step in? If an unrighteous judge will step in because of persistence, don't you think my Father will? How about you abide in me? How about you don't quit? How about you keep coming? Keep coming. And then he ends with this really kind of sad little thing at the end of it. He says, I tell you, he's going to, but I wonder when I come back, the Son of Man, he's talking to himself, am I going to find faith like that on the earth? When I come back, will I find the faith of a person who just wouldn't quit? I tell you, as I've gotten older in my faith, I've decided that one thing I've missed more than anything else in my Christianity is a little bit of spiritual stubbornness. Because that's what Jesus is talking about. Get stubborn. Say, nope, I'm going to stay here, God. I'm going to keep praying. I'm going to keep at this. I'm not giving up on this. Until you tell me no, I'm going to keep asking. Stubborn. Jesus says that's what I call faithful. And I wonder if I'm going to find it. And that's what we need. We need that. So we do that. We're going to grow fruit. And I got so much more here. I told Victoria, I said, first I thought, how am I going to get through a whole sermon of 6 verses? And I'm going to split this up in 2 sermons. There's so much here. So I want to talk about the fruit. Because he's talking about, here's what's going to happen. You're going to bear fruit. And I know that doesn't excite some people. So, I kind of want to be a blessed person. I like the part, because it starts out, blessed is the man who does all this stuff. I want to be blessed. Okay? I like that. That's good. But this bearing fruit doesn't really help me any, right? That helps other people. That's cool. But, tell me more about the blessing to me. That's what I want to know. And the thing about this psalmist is telling us here is if you want to have the full blessing of God, you have to bear fruit and share that with others. Because that's how it works. In fact, if you go to the Holy Land, which if you want to go there, Rick's getting up a group. When are you guys going? December of 2021. I think I'll be preaching some Christmas sermon about that. But those of you who want to. But if you go to Israel, there's 2 famous seas. And you'll see this in the Bible. Well, you'll see the Sea of Galilee, which is in the north. And you'll see this thing down at the bottom called the Dead Sea in the south. Right? If you go to the Sea of Galilee, I've never been, but I've seen pictures. It's amazing. This is the sea that Jesus performed some of his miracles around and everything. The Sea of Galilee is just beautiful. It's every picture you see of the Sea of Galilee has just got flowers and all this stuff, right? And if you go to the Dead Sea, it's not amazing. It's very salty. In fact, you can float in the Dead Sea just because the salt content will lift you up, right? It's desolate though. It's called dead for a reason. Do you know the only difference between the Dead Sea and the Sea of Galilee? They're in the same country. They're in the same temperate zone. They're same basic everything. The only difference is, if you look, the Sea of Galilee has an inlet and an outlet, and the Dead Sea has nothing out. That's it. Things come into the Dead Sea, and they end in the Dead Sea. The Sea of Galilee, things come in, and things come out. See, this is a principle built right into right into the promised land that God's trying to teach you. If you bear fruit, you'll bear more fruit. If you bear fruit, you'll be more blessed. Because you're supposed to be given by God, and you're supposed to give from God. Freely you have received, freely you're to give. That's a principle. So this whole thing about bearing fruit is very, very important. We need to want to bear fruit in our lives. And that means we'll be serving others too. Yeah, that's what that means. Because that's how you get blessed. If you want the blessing to keep coming, if you think about it just from a pragmatic standpoint, from heaven's standpoint, if God wants to bless people around you, and he can do it by blessing you because you're generous, why wouldn't he? But if God wants to bless people around you and everything he gives you, you hang on to and say, what else you got for me? Why would he keep blessing you? You're not helping others. God's trying to help everybody. That's why we're supposed to be participating in this. Okay. Also, the other thing he said, it was really, really interesting. He says, the leaf also shall not wither. So he's telling you it's going to bear fruit, but the leaf is not going to wither. Leaves wither, folks. They do. We see them. It's going to be coming up here any minute now. As soon as we get through all this heat and the cold snap hits in September, we're going to see leaves change colors and wither and die. But the psalmist is saying, here's where the illustration breaks for you. Because although those trees' leaves will wither and die, yours never will. Ever. Because God will keep filling you up and your leaves will not wither. In Psalm, he says that. He says, the leaf shall not wither, whatever he does will prosper. That's a miracle, right? He's telling you, you're not going to run out. You're not going to have a season of winter. You're going to keep producing fruit forever. So here's where the parable breaks down. And here's where he says this is something really, really amazing. Now, that can only happen as a miracle from God. But God's good at that miracle. And here's a very famous verse that people forget the first part of. So let me give you the whole verse here. This is in Isaiah 40. Those who wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They will mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not be faint. This is on like coffee mugs, as you're firing that caffeine in your system. Yeah, let me mount up like wings of eagles, right? It's a great verse, but don't miss this first phrase. Those who wait upon the Lord. Let me give you another way of saying that. Those who abide in the Lord. All Scripture comes back to itself. Those people, the ones who are in God, who are planted, so their roots are in the river of life, those people shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not be faint. You can't just take a hit of it and move on. Abide in me, he says, and I will abide in you. The blessings of the Lord comes to those who do not let the world influence them, who abide in him, and then share what he grants them. The question is, how badly do we want God's blessing in our lives? Because this is his formula. You say no to those things of the world. You stay in me, and I will fill you up. And then I will make you produce fruit, and you can share that fruit with other people. And here's my promise to you, he says. You will never get weak. I will keep filling you up. That's the blessing of the Lord. That's why we say no to the world, so we get this blessing. But we can't have it both ways. We either abide in the world or we abide in the Lord. We must choose. Would you all please pray with me? Heavenly Father, I thank you that you have promised us great things if we have the courage to believe you. Teach us what it means to abide in you. Help us to stop playing hokey pokey with the Holy Spirit. Show us, Lord, what is in store for us if we plant our soul and our strength in you.